In 2013, two cavers squeezed through an 18-centimeter crack deep inside a South African cave and descended into darkness. What they found at the bottom stopped them cold. Bones. Hundreds of them, and not the bones of an animal. The creature those remains belonged to had a brain smaller than species that vanished 2 million years ago. Yet it was alive just 300,000 years back, walking the same landscape as our own ancestors, breathing the same air. But here is what has shaken paleoanthropology to its core. This primitive-looking hominin, this small-bodied shadow from the deep past, appears to have been deliberately burying its dead long before any species other than our own was thought capable of such behavior. DNA analysis and forensic investigation have now begun to reveal who Homo Naledi really was, and the answer rewrites everything. On the 13th of September 2013, two amateur cavers were exploring the Rising Star cave system outside Johannesburg, South Africa. The cave was well known in the area, popular enough that local enthusiasts used it for training, but deep inside, beyond the familiar passages, they found something that had never been mapped. A crack in the rock, 18 centimeters wide, barely enough to fit a human body. They went in anyway. After crawling 12 meters through total darkness, they dropped into a small underground chamber, and there, scattered across the floor, were bones. Not the bones of an animal that had wandered in and died. These were hominin remains. They photographed everything and brought the images to paleoanthropologists Lee Berger and Pedro Boshoff. What followed was one of the most unusual excavation teams ever assembled. Berger put out a call for scientists who were also experienced cavers, specifically small-framed individuals who could physically fit through the passages. 6 women answered. Scientists and cavers simultaneously, they formed the core of the extraction team alongside the 2 original discoverers. They excavated in 2 phases. 3 weeks initially, then a return visit of 4 more weeks. What they brought out of the Naledi chamber was staggering. 1,550 fossil elements, belonging to at least 15 separate individuals, were recovered from a single chamber that the outside world had not known existed days earlier. For all that time, hundreds of years, those bones had sat undisturbed in the dark. Later excavations revealed a second location within the same cave system. The Naledi chamber, accessible only by a completely different route, yielded a further 131 fossils belonging to at least 3 more individuals. Both chambers contained remains from the same homogeneous population. Not a single species mixed with others, one people, across 2 hidden rooms inside the same mountain. Among them were infants, juveniles, middle-aged adults, the elderly. Every stage of a life represented in bone. The preservation was extraordinary. Skulls with their jaws still in place, hands and feet found articulated, the small bones still arranged in their correct anatomical positions after hundreds of years. The site immediately became the most extensive representation of skeletal elements ever recovered from a single African location. It remains, to this day, the only site anywhere on Earth confidently and exclusively associated with Homo Naledi. From the moment researchers began examining the fossils, it was clear this was unlike anything they had encountered before. The remains were human enough to be immediately recognizable as belonging to our genus. But the details were wrong, or rather, they were strange in ways that didn't fit any known species. Archaic features sat alongside modern ones. Ancient anatomy appeared in the same skeleton as characteristics associated with creatures that came millions of years later. The scientists who first studied those bones assumed they must be dealing with something very old. An early hominin, perhaps. Something from the deep past that had been sealed inside that chamber long before our own lineage had fully taken shape. They were wrong about the age, and that error, when it was eventually corrected, would make the mystery considerably darker. The bones told a contradictory story from the very beginning. Researchers examining the Naledi remains found themselves looking at a creature that seemed to belong to multiple points in evolutionary time simultaneously. Some features were archaic, the kind of anatomy associated with Australopithecines that walked the Earth 2 million years ago. Others were strikingly modern, and crucially, the combination didn't match any known species. Homo Naledi was a mosaic, and science had no existing template for it. Start with the brain. 5 skulls were recovered in sufficient condition to estimate cranial capacity. The measurements ranged between 460 and 610 cubic centimeters, with a mean of 513. To put that in context, Homo habilis, a species from roughly 2 million years ago, had a larger brain. So did Homo erectus. Naledi's brain was smaller than both, sitting closer to the Australopithecine range than to anything we would comfortably call human, but brain size alone tells an incomplete story. 3-dimensional endocasts of the interior skull surface revealed that Naledi's frontal lobe organization closely resembled that of later members of the genus Homo. The frontal lobe governs tool use, language, and social behavior. Whatever Naledi lacked in raw brain volume, its neural architecture suggested cognitive capacities that the numbers alone would not predict. The teeth compounded the confusion further. Naledi's dentition was remarkably small, far smaller than you would expect from a hominin with such a modest brain. In the standard pattern of human evolution, smaller craniums correlate with larger, more robust jaws. Naledi broke that rule completely. Its canines and post-canine teeth were reduced, its molars small in crown size, and the overall dental profile resembled something far more derived than its skull suggested. In this respect, Naledi was unlike virtually every other fossil hominin on record. Move down to the body, and the contradictions multiply. Naledi stood around 143 centimeters tall and weighed approximately 37 kilograms. Small, even by the standards of its era. Sexual dimorphism, the size difference between males and females, sat at around 20%, consistent with Homo erectus and far below the 50% gap seen in Australopithecines. That level of dimorphism is usually associated with larger-brained species. Naledi, again, refused to follow the pattern. The shoulders were narrow and primitive, more Australopithecine than contemporary Homo. The chest was narrow, but the hands were something else entirely. Naledi possessed precision grip adaptations, a well-developed thumb with strong muscle attachment points, wrist morphology suited to object manipulation, features shared with Neanderthals and modern humans, but absent in Homo habilis. Those hands could grip, manipulate, and work with fine motor control. The fingers, however, were curved and proportionally longer than almost any other fossil hominin. Climbing hands, attached to a body built for walking. The legs and feet settled that question definitively. The femur and tibia indicated capacity for long-distance bipedal travel. The foot was prominently modern human-like, efficient for running, built for ground-level life. Naledi walked upright. It covered distance. It was not a creature of the canopy. It was something in between everything. And that, it turned out, was only the beginning of what made it extraordinary. When researchers first assessed the Naledi remains, the anatomy pointed overwhelming toward great age. The small brain, the primitive shoulders, the archaic skull morphology, all of it suggested a hominin from the deep past. 1 to 2 million years old, most assumed. A relic from the early chapters of human evolution, sealed by chance inside a cave and preserved. In 2017, they dated the fossils properly, and everything shifted. 3 teeth and the sediment surrounding them were analyzed using electron, spin, resonance, and uranium-thorium dating, 2 independent methods applied simultaneously to cross-check the result. The answer that came back was not 1 to 2 million years. It was 236,000 to 335,000 years ago. The Middle Pleistocene, a period so recent in evolutionary terms that it barely registers as ancient at all. To understand why that date is so destabilizing, consider what else was happening at that moment in Africa. the first anatomically modern humans were beginning to appear. Homo sapiens, our own species, was taking shape on the same continent, in overlapping territory, at almost exactly the same time. Homo Naledi, with its Australopithecine-sized brain and its mosaic of primitive and modern features, was not a distant ancestor from a forgotten era, it was a contemporary. The two species almost certainly shared landscape. Their ranges overlapped. They may have encountered one another. Researchers examining how that coexistence could have functioned note that the two species occupied meaningfully different ecological spaces. Homo sapiens concentrated on open savannas, pursuing varied diets that included substantial meat consumption, processing food extensively, and exploiting grassland environments with increasing efficiency. Naledi, by contrast, favored mosaic environments, patchworks of forest, rocky outcrops, and sheltered terrain. Its teeth tell a different dietary story entirely. The chipping and wear patterns on Naledi's dentition suggest a diet of hard, gritty foods, unwashed roots and tubers, nuts, materials covered in dust and soil. Teeth that had to be extraordinarily wear-resistant simply to survive a lifetime of that diet. No stone tools have ever been found in association with Homo naledi, not one. Yet its hand anatomy, the precision grip, the manipulative wrist morphology, the strong thumb, suggests it was physically capable of producing them. Some researchers propose Naledi may have used tools made of wood or bone, materials that rarely survive in the fossil record. Others suggest it may have manufactured at least some of the stone tools found in the region, since it was the only identified hominin species present in that part of South Africa during the early Middle Stone Age. There is another possibility entirely, that Naledi's lineage once made tools and gradually stopped, that somewhere along hundreds of thousands of years of isolated survival, they abandoned technology, not because they failed, but because they didn't need it. Evolution does not reward complexity for its own sake. It rewards survival, and Naledi survived. What the 2017 dating also revealed, in its low dental variation and apparent geographic restriction to a single cave system, was a population that was small and genetically constrained. An isolated lineage, a remnant, a species already, perhaps, running out of time, even as it continued, against all expectation, to endure. The question of where Homo naledi belongs on the human family tree has not been quietly debated. It has been contested with the kind of intensity that only emerges when a discovery genuinely threatens established frameworks. Most researchers agree on the basic point: Naledi belongs to the genus Homo. The evidence for that is substantial. Its locomotion was human-like, long lower limbs, strong gluteal muscle insertions, modern ankles and feet built for bipedal travel. Its hands showed manipulation adaptations shared with later members of the genus. Its skull, despite its small size, fell within the recognized range of Homo morphology. On the broad question of genus classification, there is reasonable consensus. On everything else, the disagreement runs deep. Berger and colleagues, writing in 2015, argued that Naledi represented a genuinely new and distinct species. They documented derived Homo features distributed across the entire skeleton, in locomotion, in the mechanics of chewing, in the capacity for fine manipulation, and concluded that the combination was unique enough to warrant its own species designation. Homo naledi, a creature unto itself. Neves and colleagues arrived at a different conclusion in 2017. Examining the dental and cranial characteristics in detail, they found strong similarities with Homo habilis and with Australopithecus sediba. Their interpretation was that Naledi might represent a South African variety of Homo habilis, rather than an entirely new species, a regional population rather than a distinct lineage. They found no compelling reason to create a new taxonomic category. Irish and colleagues pushed back in 2018. Their analysis of crown and root morphology across all Naledi specimens found a pattern so internally consistent and so distinct from every other known hominin that it could only indicate a genuinely separate species. The uniformity itself was the argument. This population was too coherent and too different to be folded into an existing category. Schroeder and colleagues added another layer in 2016. They noted the strong cranial resemblance between Naledi and small-brained Homo erectus specimens, particularly small African representatives. But they also noted that the mandible was unlike any known Homo erectus jaw, different enough that accommodating Naledi within erectus would require dramatically expanding an already highly variable species. The deeper question beneath all of this is not just what Naledi was, but when its lineage diverged. The candidates span an enormous range. It may have branched off around the time of Homo habilis, representing an early split in the genus. It may be a sister taxon to Homo erectus, a parallel lineage that developed alongside rather than from it. It may descend from Heidelbergensis. There is even a possibility, not widely favored but not dismissed, that Naledi resulted from interbreeding between Homo and late Australopithecines. What every hypothesis shares is an acknowledgement that Naledi does not fit the standard narrative of human evolution. That narrative runs in one direction, toward larger brains, greater complexity, increasing technological sophistication. Naledi survived for hundreds of thousands of years, while larger brained species appeared and vanished around it. It did so with a modest brain without confirmed tools, in an isolated corner of southern Africa. Evolution, Naledi reminds us, does not progress. It simply continues. And sometimes what continues longest is what we least expected to endure. The anatomy is extraordinary. The age is destabilizing. But neither of those things is what has most profoundly unsettled the scientific community. That distinction belongs to the cave itself. Finding hominin remains inside a cave is not unusual. Caves preserve bone. They shelter the dead from scavengers and the elements. Across the fossil record, caves appear again and again as repositories of ancient remains. But the Naledi chamber is not simply a cave. It is a chamber reachable only by squeezing through an 18-centimetre crack, crawling 12 meters through total darkness, and descending into a space that takes modern cavers, equipped with lights, maps, and climbing gear, approximately 40 minutes to reach from the main entrance. Homo Naledi was small, but that passage would have challenged them severely, and they almost certainly had no artificial light. Dirks and colleagues examined the chamber exhaustively in 2015 and reached a conclusion that the field has been arguing about ever since. The bodies were deliberately carried inside and deposited. The evidence they marshaled was comprehensive. There was no sign of trauma consistent with the bodies having been dropped or dragged. No large predator could access the chamber through the only known entrance. No other animal remains were present beyond a small number of rodents. There was no evidence of flooding, of roof collapse, of any natural mechanism that could have transported 15 individuals of every age in varying states of preservation into that specific location. No hidden shafts were found, no alternative entrances. Critically, the preservation quality of the bones indicated the bodies had been brought inside before significant decomposition had occurred. Someone or something had carried them there fresh. Here is where the implications become almost impossible to absorb. Navigating those passages in complete darkness, transporting bodies, doing so repeatedly over time, because the individuals were not deposited simultaneously, would almost certainly have required fire. Controlled, portable, deliberately managed fire. In a species whose morphology we had placed firmly in the primitive category. The demographic profile of the remains adds weight to the deliberate burial argument. Every age group is present: infants, juveniles, mature adults, the elderly. That spread does not resemble the profile of an accident or a predation event. It resembles a practice, something repeated across the full lifespan of a community. The counter-arguments are serious and should not be dismissed. Val, writing in 2016, pointed to evidence of beetle and snail damage on some specimens, suggesting certain bodies had decomposed before reaching the chamber. She argued that natural mummification could explain the preservation quality and that undiscovered entrances could not be ruled out. Dirks and Berger responded the following year, reaffirming the absence of water flow evidence and maintaining their position, while also raising, with notable candor, the possibility that Homo sapiens had carried Naledi bodies inside. Our ancestors were certainly capable of it, but Naledi was also capable. Chimpanzees mourn their dead. They carry deceased young for days. A hominin with Naledi's frontal lobe organization and social complexity almost certainly possessed comparable emotional depth. Something went into that darkness carrying its dead. Whatever drove it there, practicality, grief, ritual, or something we have no name for yet, was not supposed to exist in a brain that small. The bones have told us extraordinary things, but bones have limits. They reveal shape, size, wear, and damage. They suggest behavior and imply capability. What they cannot do, on their own, is tell us with precision where a species sits in the web of life, how it connects, at the deepest biological level, to the other hominins that shared its world. For that, you need DNA. Extracting ancient DNA from hominin fossils is difficult under the best circumstances. The Rising Star Cave system presents particular challenges. The South African climate is not conducive to long-term genetic preservation in the way that the frozen north has been for Neanderthal and Denisovan material. The heat, the humidity, the passage of time, all of it degrades the molecular evidence that researchers most want to recover. But what has already emerged from genetic analysis confirms what the morphology suggested and then goes further. Homo naledi was not a local variant of another known species. It was not a population of Homo erectus that had drifted into unusual anatomy through isolation. The genetic signatures, fragmentary as the current evidence remains, point consistently toward a lineage that branched away from the main current of human evolution early and then persisted, separately, for an extraordinarily long time. The low dental variation observed across all recovered specimens is itself a genetic signal. It speaks of a population that was small, that had been isolated for generations, and that had been breeding within a restricted community for long enough to reduce its own internal diversity. This is not the genetic profile of a species in its prime. It is the profile of a remnant, a lineage that had already contracted, already narrowed, already begun the slow process of disappearing before the world finished the job. That world was changing rapidly. The Middle and Late Pleistocene brought dramatic environmental shifts across southern Africa. Grasslands expanded into interior regions that had previously supported the mosaic environments Naledi depended upon. The forested patches and rocky outcrops that provided shelter, food diversity, and refuge from predators began to shrink. A species already operating with low genetic diversity and a restricted geographic range had almost no buffer against that kind of pressure. Homo sapiens, expanding and adapting, has sometimes been cast as the agent of Naledi's extinction. The evidence does not strongly support that narrative. The two species occupied sufficiently different ecological niches, different diets, different preferred terrain, different energetic strategies, that direct competition was probably limited. Naledi's disappearance looks less like displacement and more like the quiet failure of a small population to survive a world that was reshaping itself around them. There may have been more of them than we currently know. The Rising Star Cave system is a single location. It is possible that Naledi ranged more widely across southern and central Africa, that fossils currently classified as other species may one day be reattributed to this lineage, that the genetic picture will eventually become clearer and more complete. What is already clear is this: Homo naledi was real, distinct, and remarkable. It lived and thought and carried its dead into the dark. And then, somewhere between 236,000 and 300,000 years ago, it was gone, leaving behind only bones and questions and the unsettling suggestion that we have barely begun to understand our own story. The Rising Star Cave is dark again, silent. The bones are gone, but the questions remain, and they are not small questions. They concern the origins of grief, of ritual, of the impulse to carry your dead somewhere meaningful rather than leave them where they fell. Homo naledi was not supposed to be capable of any of that. It had the wrong brain size, the wrong morphology, the wrong profile entirely for the behaviors the evidence suggests it was performing. And yet, DNA and fossil analysis have confirmed what the anatomy first hinted: a distinct lineage, isolated and enduring, that survived against every expectation while larger-brained contemporaries vanished around it. Evolution has no preferred direction. It has no destination. Naledi proved that something small and ancient and strange can persist, can feel, and can matter. In those bones lies a question we are only beginning to hear.